I know it took us a second. Great to see you today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
So, one, it was awesome seeing you in Miami last week. Feels like almost a lifetime ago now. So much was happening last week. How are you feeling after Consensus, Accelerate, and yeah, I would love to kind of get the pulse from you before we dive into what you're building.
Yeah, consensus was great actually. So and accelerate as well. So I think most of the venue was filled with TradFi folks, which is a good sign that it's actually real economy, real money coming to crypto, right? And crypto kind of merging with fintech, stable coins leading the narrative. So yeah, so I think this consensus was very different from the previous ones because it was less degen, less crypto native, but more real. And, it's exciting, right? Because it means that the industry is actually growing and not dying like within the crypto, like small pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I saw a take from you, Georgie, that you said every fintech is adding stables, every crypto is becoming a bank.
Yes, exactly. So that's, I think, the industry consensus now, right? That everyone is believing actively.
So I can imagine as someone building what you're building, privacy, something that we're excited to dive way more into with you guys over time as institutions and more of the TradFi community enters this conversation. I can imagine that that priority is more felt, and that priority is something that is, if you compare a degen trader compared to an institutional CFO, privacy and some of these things probably are held to a standard that is way higher. Maybe two-part question here as we kick off this conversation. Like, one, give us the intro of what you're building, and then also just this current moment that we're talking about of what you're seeing with that priority becoming more front and center for these companies.
Yeah, it's so exciting that it's finally happening because I started Hinkal with my brother it was 3.5 years ago, right after Tornado Cash sanctions. And back then, institutional side of it was kind of picking up, but then FTX crash happened. Right, so everything institutional was kind of paused, and I think that actually led to more like DeFi native, like crypto degen energy that actually, kind of prevented us from earlier success, right, in terms of adoption, institutional adoption. So it took another 3 years actually to get back to the same TradFi kind of institutional reality. And then, basically what we're building is privacy for stablecoin payments. So it's an infrastructure for public chains and on public chains, right? But then for neobanks, for wallets, for PSPs and custodians, to enable privacy of a sender, amount, recipient on chains like Ethereum, Polygon, Solana, Tron. Um, we are also live on many other chains, but I think like our solution is the only solution on the market that allows you to have privacy of your wallet and the amounts on all the main public chains, right, in one go. So this makes us, when we started Kinko, one of the major, kind of thing that we had to figure out is what is a path for someone to use privacy, right? And then, there are a few directions. First is you build, something that actually just plugs in current chains, current wallets, current stable coins, right? Another like harder path is you build your own custom L2 or L1. But then the cost actually for someone to use it, it's super high, right? Like imagine bootstrapping ecosystem, right? You have to bootstrap, you have to, launch stablecoin and then pay, right, to the major issuers to launch on your chain. You have to bring ecosystem. You have to make sure, all the enterprises trust this. There is a reason why all the enterprises, trust public chains like Ethereum, Polygon, Solana, like why USDT on Tron has so much volume, right? And it just implies that it's like there's a trust, there's security guarantees that they provide, and that's what was our bet, right? That okay, we will build the most seamless privacy that hides everything that needs to be hidden in the most compliant way and provides value like without actually requirement to transition anywhere else, right? Use current stable coins, use current chains, current custodians, and just have privacy on top.
What's the thing that people get wrong here? Or the thing that you find either from like market sentiment, prospects or customers that you're talking with, what are some of these misconceptions of around confidentiality, privacy, and some of the things that you're often running into when you're bringing some of these businesses into this protocol that you're often like, I'm imagining there's some like whack-a-mole that you're playing often. What are some of these things that you're often kind of battling with or having to explain when people are wrapping their heads around this?
Yeah, I think there's a still huge misunderstanding, right? And gap, and not only gap between, us, like more kind of crypto native people and enterprise, but more, but even like if you think about, custodians, right, wallet providers and people who build privacy, right? Because when you start explaining, okay, like what hides amounts, what hides relationships, why you should hide relationships, and amount is not sufficient, why, standalone L2 and L1 is actually very hard to adopt for enterprise because they're already using, right, current existing chains. So there are so many questions, right, that should be explained in detail for people to understand what the fuck is privacy. That's why. So it takes a lot of time, right, to explain, how it is achieved, right, and why, ZK and Stealth addresses is better solution than, let's say, FHE, because FHE has full dependency, right, on some backend. So there's, lots to be explained before we get to this. Okay, like that's what Hinkal does. But then, you start talking in abstractions, right? So think about you have your own wallet. There's a public balance of this wallet, which is shown in your Fireblocks account. But think about there's a private door, right? That with the same key, you can see this, private amount and no one else can see. And then people start getting, okay, this can be simple, right? And then the next step, okay, is like, this enterprise is already interested because they don't want to reveal all the data to the counterparties, right, when they make payroll or B2B payments. So now the next step is, okay, how can we explain it and really guide the developers, right, of this organization to integrate privacy in the most seamless way so they understand and trust the infrastructure.
Zach, when you're hearing this and you're trying to, I love the banner. What the hell? What the F is privacy?
I couldn't resist.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
good. So you have amounts, right? You have amounts of, the amount of transactions and the value of those transactions that are being sent and received. That's obviously something that is very important to keep private for certain use cases. Zach, we have two Zachs on our team, right? Like if I'm paying one Zach 10 times more than the other Zach and they don't know that, and that's just publicly on chain, even like, even in a simple use case like that, like that's something that's I know we've talked about payroll is like a very obvious use case here. What are some of these? So you have the mount and then the relationships. It sounds like are these two kind of key threads that you pull. What are some of those the use cases that you see really, really coming to life here when you're thinking about how Hinkal comes to market, resonates, and comes to life in terms of where it's valuable? Payroll is one of them. What are some of these other ones that you find are really resonant right now in the market?
Yeah, so the second biggest bucket, I mean, now we have like the pipeline, right, that we have, and finally having integration is just huge, right? Because suddenly everyone realized that there's the need for privacy, right? So we just announced, I don't know if you saw, like Polygon deal, right, where they integrated us in the Polygon wallet, and it means that, Polygon is one of the crypto native entities. They also have like super enterprise focused team, right? So they acquired CoinMe and Sequence, and now they are, basically onboarding lots of Web2 companies, right, to crypto with all this, orchestration infrastructure and embedded wallets. They were one of the first realizing, okay, like when we go to enterprises, we create these embedded wallets, right, for these enterprises. And, for the sake of example, I would just say, think about Ramp, right? You go to Ramp, you create all these embedded wallets. They are segregated wallets, right? So it's not a pooled account. So like each wallet, even if custody belongs to, one entity, each wallet actually appears on chain. Each transaction is on chain transaction, right? And then when you make a payment, like if it's even B2B payment between two entities of, Ramp's accounts, right? Or like this is a on-chain trace that basically recipient sees what's the balance of the sender sees what the balance of recipient, right? And then they can also derive further relationships, right? So they can see the rest of the graph. Okay, like you send this, then there is a salary payment, then there is a vendor payment, there is a margin, right? So it's actually like leaks super sensitive info that should
Yeah.
never appear on chain. And imagine this is a private, it's a private company, right? But imagine public companies like dLocal, right? So they just announced this, stablecoin deal, right? And this is a direct compromise of all the public data, right? Because someone before the announcement of quarterly results can just look at, okay, what are the volumes with stablecoins? So more volumes, more move to stablecoins, higher is the leakage of the data, right? So, and this is, finally, this is super crucial, like very high realization and, exciting time for this. But I think let me just dive deep on the use cases, right? So this use case is one, right? So everyone now goes to this embedded wallets and just increase the life cycle of the yield of the company, right? So if it's a payroll company, they were losing yield whenever they were paying contractor because money was going to the bank account, right? So that's it. The yield is gone. But now with the stablecoin cards, right? So they actually increase
And this is the
lifetime value.
SDK, right? You're talking about the SDK specifically?
Yeah, SDK.
Okay.
SDK.
All right, keep going. I just
Yeah,
wanted to make
so
sure we were showing the right thing here.
And with this life cycle increase of the yield, right? So now there's a stablecoin card that contractor can pay, right? So the yield is actually generated on a higher basis, right? So you can actually earn money. And with us, right? So you can, all the transactions happening between the wallets are private. So what appears on chain is the relationship is hidden, which is the wallets are hidden and amounts are hidden while you use the same wallets because your private key actually unlocks private balance inside Hinkal smart contract. So this is the how privacy is achieved. And second big use case right outside of this neobank use case is actually PSP to merchant settlement. Right. So whenever you settle merchant, if this merchant, makes a payout in stables, and lots of industries actually prefer payouts in stables, right? So same, paying out creators or paying out, for vendors in industries such as iGaming, right? This is especially crucial. You just leak your revenue immediately, right? So your counterpart, you receive settlement in stablecoin, then you make payout to vendor, and your vendor sees how much you're earning, how much, what's your economics with your users. And, it just leaks super sensitive info. So PSP to merchant settlement is the second biggest use case for privacy that we are focused on. And then the third one is just custodians, right? So all the custodians wallets, are now actively focused on privacy, right? And what they are looking for is like multi-chain privacy that plugs in current infrastructure, hides relationships, hides amounts, and is fully compliant, right? So I think it's a kind of ChatGPT moment for privacy that I'm super excited because, it's kind of 3.5 years in waiting. So I'm always comparing myself to Figma, to get some excitement about that.
Let's go. Let's go. So you guys, you have some really strategic relationships, it looks like, and something that it looks like one of the big differentiators here for you is the networks and the relationships that you have to these different chains. Speak a little bit about how that came to be. It sounds like you've been building these integrations out for many years. What sort of competitive positioning do you think that unlocks for you guys?
Yeah, so I think privacy was the most unsexy industry, right, for the past 3 years. So no one was actually looking for privacy, right, actively because they were okay. Like there's VCs basically got burned with privacy architecture because it underperformed from a token standpoint, and it was just less attention also because of compliance issues, right? It had with Tornado sanctions. But now, finally, it just became very obvious that it should happen, right? And privacy should be enabled on public chains, right, with existing stack. And, the like Polygon deal there, I just shared, they're just far ahead because it's not just a chain. It's a fully vertical stack. So with all the embedded wallets on and off ramps, right, and enterprise deals. But from a standpoint of networks, I wouldn't think that, all the networks are going to build the vertical stack, right? I think, Polygon is like the exception. So when I think about Polygon deal is the closest comparison is like Bridge and Privy, right? Or, Crossmint and, some other solutions there. So it's basically, full stack there. And like what integrators are looking for is something that, already works with the infrastructure they have, right? Because you don't want to make them move somewhere else. If wallet doesn't support like whatever Stellar chain, right? And you have privacy only on Stellar chain, then it's a kind of hard no, right? Because they have to migrate infrastructure to new chain, support, basically move the wallets with the stable coins that are not supported on this new chain, right? So we are just meeting the customers where they are. And even if you think about major volumes now, right? So USDT on Tron, right? So we never thought that USDT on Tron would be so popular, but we go to PSPs and they were like, we do USDT on Tron, right? So somehow USDT is associated with Tron. So we had to build actually deployment. We had to deploy Hinkal to Tron chain, right, to make this possible. So now they were okay. Like, is there USDT on Tron? Yes. Like newer chains that they are increasingly trusting is Solana, right? Do we have Solana? Yes. And are they getting everything in one SDK? And now we are also adding APIs, right? And WAS solution, yes, right? So it just always removing the friction to use your solution, and I think this makes makes us actually one of the most competitive solutions there. I don't think we have lots of other solutions when we talk to integrators.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's if I'm, from my vantage point, we talk to all the teams and all the builders and ecosystem partners. It's like there's a ton of buzz right now around Canton and what they are doing for institutions, privacy, confidentiality, and like having that be some sort of like integrated, baked in value add to their chain. And I think a lot of these like, ecosystems that have been around for a long time and have had many different seasons, it's almost, if I'm understanding this from the outside, it kind of seems like what Hinkal is providing is the ability to offer effectively the same types of benefits, even if that wasn't necessarily the story or the history of a network like Polygon. Working with you guys almost brings them up to speed in terms of those value adds so that they can continue to retain their developers and builders and continue to stay competitive against some of those like privacy focused chains.
It's a good way to think about, but I think we should think about, the use case and adoption of this use case, right? So, I'm not super familiar with Canton, but I know base architecture, right? So Canton actually hides amounts and also relationships, right? The same what we do. But the problem with Canton is, you have to migrate. There is no way you can migrate. You can avoid migration, right? And with migration, like, you don't have major wallet supporting Canton now. You have Braun and a couple more. Transactions are expensive, right? But then, they have unique architecture for this, standalone subchains that fit to Wall Street and, deep pockets to subsidize, right? I saw that their annual incentives is 1 billion, right? So, and that's how much it takes, right, for you to bring someone to like new chain. So with Polygon, it's easier story, right? So Polygon already has tons of users. So, and then I think where Polygon and, other chains that, Solana and Base, Ethereum will win here is with tons of users. Think about use case PSP to merchant settlement. You're settling with a merchant. It's a stable coin, right? Canton, brought this merchant in. It can be the bank, right? And then, but now you have this, you are on Canton, right? And you have to make payouts. And the probability that your vendor is on Canton chain is close to zero, right? Because, it's all like, because they should somehow bring also all the vendors and all the employees to Canton, right? So to just continue supply chain, right, of privacy. Otherwise, you're just becoming public and bridging out of the chain. So I think that's a problem that I'm having with private chains because it's just one lack of privacy and then privacy is gone all the time.
Yeah, I love hearing you speak about this and the differences there. You've spent a lot of time in this space and thinking through the differences. And we need to wrap here, but we're really excited to bring you on and more of the ecosystem around these considerations and highlight them more because the use cases and the trade-offs that are at play here they make or break so many things. So thank you for what you're building and excited to continue to cover the ecosystem around Hinkal.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. And yeah, looking forward to our partnership.
You got it, man.
I loved how you took us through comparing these sort of unknown novel things to known things. The homework assignment is next time. I know you're a judoka. You gotta give us judo and privacy and how it all relates. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, you have to learn now about privacy, right? Because it will become dangerous.